Well, welcome to Christ and Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short. Glad to have you along for our discussion today. We're going to be talking about an insane issue. That's right, an insane issue, I say, because this is something that just a few decades ago would not have even been a concern. And that is, we're talking about male athletes who are now swimming and running in the female sports. And this is absurd. This is crazy. This is sort of the thing that you would write a script for a movie, and then it would hardly be believable when they actually went to produce the movie, because you have men lining up to play and participate in women's sports. And why are they doing that? Because they can win in women's sports. And all they have to do is simply declare themselves male or female, and they can be a part of women's sports. And so let's look at a video clip of one of these athletes and a description of this situation, and then we'll talk more about it, because this is truly crazy, and you really don't believe it until you hear the news reports. But then we'll get into it and show, as a Christian, this is the foolishness of the world. It talks about in the Bible where the God of this world has blinded the minds and the eyes of the unbelievers. And this is part of that foolishness.
Tension and fueling a debate over transgender athletes in college sports.
That's right. Leah Thomas, a transgender woman who previously competed for 3 years on the men's team, has set school and national records in women's swimming since coming out as trans in 2019. NBC Out reporter Joe Yorkeba has been following this story and joins us now. Joe, good morning. So tell us about these records that she's set. That's part of what's drawing this attention, and then the reaction within the world of college sports.
Now, notice that the anchor woman is using the pronoun she. So she's using the feminine pronoun she, but this is a man. This is a biological man. He swam for years in the men's division because he's a man. Then he decided that he's going to transition and be a woman, and now the controversy is because he's breaking all kinds of records. Well, this anchor woman is calling him a she, and very much in line with the LGBT movement. So she's buying into this false reality. And let's see what the correspondent here says.
Good morning. Sure. So Leah Thomas is a senior, and she has performed well at nearly every meet so far this season. But the media firestorm really began after her performance at the Zippy Invitational in Ohio earlier this month. And she won 3 events and set 2 national records there. And the reaction in the world of college sports has been really mixed. There are some folks who don't.
So obviously this man is breaking records in the women's division. He beat his competitors, the girls, by over 30 seconds. In fact, I think it was close to 40 seconds in a swimming match. This is unheard of. And you can see here that this is a man. If you cut his hair and you get a picture of him, even up close, you're going to see that he's a man. And he sounds like a man. When he's being interviewed, his voice is the same as a man, just like Bruce Jenner. When he is interviewed, he sounds like a man. He does not sound like a woman. His vocal range is that of a man. This swimmer's DNA is that of a man. He is a biological male, and he's swimming and breaking all kinds of records in the women's division. This is totally insane.
Don't believe Thomas should be allowed to compete on the women's team at all because she went through male puberty. Others say that the rules that she's competing under should be made more strict. And then there are those who have defended her who say that those rules are completely reasonable and that this entire debate is really just the result of a few people who are upset that a trans woman has won something at all.
Leah, Joe, let's talk about some of the rules. Leah had to meet certain standards to compete on the women's team, which are enforced by the NCAA. What are those rules? How do they compare to other major sports governing bodies like the Olympics Committee?
Yeah, the NCAA requires trans women athletes to undergo at least 1 year of testosterone suppression treatment in order to compete on the women's team. And Leah, when she began competing in November at the start of the season, had completed about 2.5 years. And those guidelines are actually on the more strict end in terms of guidance set by sports governing bodies. The International Olympic Committee previously had similar guidance. It put a limit on athletes' testosterone levels and required some of them to undergo treatments. But the IOC released a new framework in November where it actually described those treatments as sometimes medically unnecessary without there being really clear scientific data that addresses the specific athletes and the sport in consideration. So the IOC has actually shifted the burden of proving that there is or isn't an advantage from the athlete onto the sports governing body, which is in contrast to the NCAA policy.
So, Joe, we know there really has...
That is a joke because they're even debating the issue of whether there is an advantage. Really? Do we have to actually question whether there's an advantage of a male athlete over a female athlete? Is there any question in the minds of any sane people that there are advantages? And it's not just testosterone. This guy that's swimming against girls and identifies as a woman now and claims that he's transitioned, he has been taking testosterone suppression medication for a couple years. Well, so what? He's still a male. He was still raised a male. He has all the advantages that a male has. And you just can't come in after the fact that you are a male. You can't come in and say, well, I've been taking medication that sort of suppresses my male hormones in my body. That is not good enough. You cannot become a woman through the taking of medication. This is absurd. This is insane. And to even have the discussion, it shows how really foolish our society is.
There's been a lot of debate, as Joe mentioned at the top of this, about transgender athletes in sports. And then cases like these, it seems individuals like Leah become this sort of lightning rod around that debate, like shown as this example. But what research on a wider scale?
Yeah, they become a lightning rod because when you are swimming against girls and you're a boy and you beat them by 30 to 40 seconds in a swim match, yeah, there's glaring inequalities. There are glaring inconsistencies, and it's totally fundamentally unfair. And so, yeah, it shouldn't have to spark a debate. There shouldn't even have to be a debate. But we have this powerful LGBTQ lobby, and we have a lot of weak leaders at all levels of our culture, and they just simply won't go up against this powerful LGBTQ lobby. They don't want to be labeled transphobic or homophobic or anti-trans or whatever the label that the LGBTQ movement puts on people. These leaders in key positions in our society, they don't want to go against that lobby, and so they just cave right in and pretend the emperor has clothes on. Well, it's going to take people who stand up and say, this is crazy, this is absurd, this is foolish. Obviously, there are advantages. Obviously, how can a swimmer in the women's division win by 30 to 40 seconds and just simply dominate the sport and have any kind of fairness? There is no fairness until we get away from this craziness.
Is there into the performance of transgender athletes? So we're not just talking about one, especially regarding the role testosterone plays.
Right. Yeah, there's actually very, very little research. I talked to Joanna Harper, who's a trans runner and researcher who's studying the effects of hormones on trans athletes now in England. And she released the first and only published data on trans athletes in 2015, and it evaluated the race times of 8 trans women distance runners after they had transitioned. And she found that they were no more competitive in the female division than they had been in the male division. And then there's one other often cited study.
So let me get this right. There's a trans athlete who is conducting a study. And this trans athlete, lo and behold, finds that there is no advantage for a man to transition into a woman, supposedly, and run against women. Well, I wonder if there might be any bias in that research. A trans activist doing research and releasing studies saying that there's no physical advantage over biological men against women in their own sport. I question that research. Everyone should.
Journal of Sports Medicine, which found that transgender women in the Air Force perform better on fitness tests after 1 year of hormone therapy when compared to cisgender women. And after 2 years, the study author told NBC News that their performance was fairly equivalent to cisgender women. But researchers note that that study wasn't on elite athletes, and it didn't study a particular sport. And that's why researchers like Harper say that there's an urgent need for more data to help create better policy.
All right, Joe, thank you so much.
Really? You need research, more research to know that biological men outperform biological women in sports as far as running, swimming, and anything that involves muscles and heavy durability. You really need studies to know that. It's crazy. This whole issue is just people taking an ideology, the LGBTQ ideology, at the transgender ideology, and elevating it above reason, experience, science, and everything else. And they're just supporting that ideology, supporting all of the science and all of the reasoning and data and everything in order to promote their ideology. This is crazy. Well, let's go down and read some of the article. It says, a swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania is the latest target in the culture war debate over whether transgender girls and women should be allowed to participate on female sports teams. So, yes, this is the latest target in the culture war. Now, some people say Christians should not be involved in the culture war. Well, let me put it this way. Should Christians be involved in rational discussion? Should Christians be involved in issues and debates in the culture? Because if a Christian involves himself in the debate, discussion, talk, conversation about issues of moral significance, then the Bible will come into play, because a biblical Christian will think and live according to the Bible. And the Bible, correctly interpreted, will always be the wise choice and the wise course, because that's wisdom from God. So when Christians bring themselves into this debate, which they should, they will be arguing against this nonsense, based on the Bible, but also based on reason and logic and experience. So we don't have to actually quote chapter and verse on this one. We can just get out our reason and logic and experience and science and say, just look at those, and you will find out that this is nonsense. And we won't even have to be quoting a verse in the Bible. But we, as Christians, do quote verses in the Bible. And of course, the Bible says this is totally absurd. Leah Thomas, who came out as a trans in 2019, set 3 school records and 2 national records at the meet this month. Okay. So a man swimming against women sets records. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Since then, Thomas has faced criticism and verbal attacks from anti-trans groups, conservative media, and reportedly even 2 teammates. Well, I think this person should be receiving criticism from pretty much everybody who cares about fairness and justice, because if women allow trans athletes into their sports, they're not going to have women's sports anymore. It's going to be trans sports, because the trans people will win all the time. Some of the headlines about Thomas' wins said she smashed the records and continued her dominant season alongside pre-transition photos of her using her previous name and male pronouns, practicing known as dead naming and misgendering. Yes, that's true. And we do that because we don't accept this fantasy, this delusion that a man can become a woman. And so we don't respect the pronouns because we don't believe that that's a reality. His records that he's setting in the women's division are totally nonsense, as is his pronoun. of her and she. We don't respect those because we don't believe that he's speaking the truth. We believe he's lying, and we're not buying into the lie. Transgender advocates have condemned that coverage and some of the conversation about Thomas as transphobic. It's actually just common sense. It's actually reflecting reality. We don't buy into the delusion of the trans community, and so they criticize our conversation about them, but they're just trying to drag us into their own insanity, and we refuse to go. They said it mischaracterizes her victories to make it appear that transgender women are cheating just by being trans, and implies that one trans woman winning means trans women generally are dominating sports. He is cheating because he's a man and he's running against women. That's cheating. They note that Thomas is competing within guidance issued by National Collegiate Athletic Association. Yes, he is competing in a line with National Collegiate Athletic Association. That doesn't mean anything. The National Collegiate Athletic Association is caving in to the LGBTQ lobby. They are buying into the foolishness, and so we don't buy into their foolishness. Thomas's critics have varying views. Some have used explicitly anti-transgender language and argue that trans women should be completely banned from women's sports. Yes, they should. While others argue that the NCAA policy regarding trans athletes' participation isn't strict enough. Well, it's not strict enough because there should be a total ban of trans athletes in the NCAA, as well as every other sports organization, from the high school level all the way up. There should be a total ban because this is nonsense. It's anti-science. It makes no sense. It's just simply a delusion that LGBTQ advocates are pushing right now, and we don't have to go along with them. We shouldn't follow them because they're making us dumber. They're dumbing us down. They're dumbing culture down to their level. We need to maintain our reason and logic and not submit to the foolishness. Thomas declined an interview with NBC News and has done only one recent interview with the podcast Swim Swam. In that interview, he said he and his coaches expected that there would be some measure of pushback in response to his competing, but not quite to the extent that it has blown up. Well, when you beat other swimmers by 30 to 40 seconds, I mean, you could just go out and buy a Subway sandwich and come back and be chomping on it while the next best swimmer comes in finally and touches the wall. I just don't engage with it, he said, regarding the criticism. It's not healthy for me to read it and engage with it at all. Well, you really should engage with it because your delusion that you're living under right now and you're trying to get everyone else to buy into really needs to be refuted in your mind so that you can then go back to being what you really are, which is a biological male, and swim against the biological males. He had been swimming for like 2 or 3 years in the men's swimming at the collegiate level. And so finally he just decides, okay, I'd like to swim with the women. So he declares himself a girl. And he wants us all to buy into that? I'm sorry. That is just insanity. And somebody needs to call him out. He needs to listen to their criticisms. And he needs to repent and change. So he's corrupting culture, and he's feeling like he's the victim. This is insanity. Swimming as his authentic self. Thomas swam on the men's team for his first 3 years at Penn. So he's swimming at the collegiate level as a man because he is a man. And for part of that time, he said he was transitioning. Okay, so he's taking testosterone-suppressing drugs. He started his medical transition in May 2019 and began gender-affirming hormones also known as hormone replacement therapy, which for him included testosterone blockers and estrogen. He said he decided to swim out the 2018-2019 season on the men's team without coming out, which caused a lot of distress for me, he told SwimSwam. Okay, so here's a very confused person, a very delusional person, a mentally unstable person who is swimming in his biological category, a male, but he said it caused a lot of distress for him. Okay, so he was under a lot of stress. So what? I was struggling, he said. My mental health was not very good. It's still not very good. There was a lot of unease and basically just feeling trapped in my body like it didn't align. Okay, so you have a thing called gender dysphoria, which is your mind and your body are not aligned right. So what you need to do is go in for counseling, and you need to work this through so that your thinking conforms with your biology. Your mind conforms with your body. That's the correct way to go about it. Don't force fit your body into your mind. Do it the other way. He came out to his coaches and teammates in the fall of 2019 and swam the rest of his junior year, 2019-2020, on the men's team as well, a time he described as an uncomfortable experience. Okay, so he's feeling uncomfortable. A lot of people at the college level, in college sports, with all the pressures of college, feel uncomfortable. No big deal. By the summer of 2020, he had been on testosterone suppressants for a full year, meeting a guideline set by the NCAA 2011. That's a bogus guideline, by the way. Its handbook for transgender athletes states a trans female treated with testosterone suppression medication may continue to compete on a men's team, but may not compete on a women's team without changing it to a mixed team status until completing 1 year of testosterone suppression treatment. He said he submitted medical information that included blood tests of his hormone level. NCAA approved his request and cleared him to compete on the women's team that fall. See, now that's the problem. You have NCAA people, adults, grown-ups in the room who fail to block this craziness, this insanity. And it's spread from college to college, campus to campus. It's spread everywhere in our culture. It's now in the high school level. You have athletic organizations at the high school level, athletic associations that are approving this. That is a problem. And we have to stop it before it just runs our culture totally into the ground. But then COVID-19 led to a nationwide lockdown, and the Ivy League canceled its swimming season. Thomas said he decided to take the year off to save his eligibility, given how important it is to me to be able to compete and swim as my authentic self. He began competing on the women's team in November and at the start of 2021-22 season, and said he has been on hormone therapy for just over 2.5 years. Okay, so, but the problem here is all the hormone treatment in the world does not change the fact that you were born male. Every cell in your body is male. You've already had the benefit of all of the years with that hormone, increased testosterone and all of the other things that go into the advantage that gives males advantage over females. And now you're going to switch. This is totally insane. It's not fair for the women. These women have trained hard, and you're coming in and you're ruining their opportunity in their sport. And it's just going to take people to put it bluntly. You are cheating, sir, no matter what you call yourself. Thomas has performed well at nearly every meet so far this season. Duh, of course he would. But the media firestorm began after his performance at the Zippy Invitational at the University of Akron in Ohio, when he won 3 events and set 3 program records, meet and pool records, along with 2 national records in the 1650 yards freestyle in particular, he was 38 seconds ahead of teammate Anna Calanzada, who finished second. Right-wing media outlets have shared video of Thomas winning the race on social media. Of course they will. Of course they will. They're trying to make the case that this is not fair. And it's powerful evidence. When you see the second-place competitor coming in it's nearly 40 seconds late, then it's visual evidence that this is not fair. Since then, he's received international media attention, and two of his teammates, speaking anonymously, told the sports website Outkick that they disagree with his participation, viewing it as unfair. Of course they do. They've worked hard for their sport. NBC News has been unable to verify these reports. University of Pennsylvania Athletic and several members of the women's swim team have not responded for requests for comment. Of course they're not, because if they do these interviews, they're going to be criticized to the point where they're probably going to have to leave their sport. So this is just the start of this. This article goes on, and we'll pick it up at some other point next time. But again, Christians have a valuable position in culture right now, and we're to be the salt and light of our culture. And that means we need to speak up when foolishness is being served on a platter, and that's what exactly is happening here in the case of these trans athletes. This is foolishness on steroids. When you have men who are coming over into the women's sports and depriving the women of victories, depriving women of scholarships, for example, at the high school level, these trans athletes coming into women's sports at the high school level, taking first place, breaking records, getting all of the attention, robbing women of their rightful scholarships that they need to go on to college to compete. And these so-called trans men, trans boys, are taking away or stealing their women's opportunities in athletics, and it needs to stop. And, you know, you have to hand it to J.K. Rowling. She's a liberal, she's a leftist, and yet she has come out and said this is insanity, and it's cost her a lot. She's had endorsements canceled, and she's had opportunities for speaking engagements canceled. They're trying to cancel J.K. Rowling, who is the author of Harry Potter series. And there are some other brave leftists and liberals who have even said this has gone way too far. This is absurd. So as Christians, we need to be standing up as salt and light in our culture and saying, no, we will not abide by this insanity, and call it out for what it is. It's total foolishness. We don't accept it. We're not going to endorse it. We can't approve it. And we're not going to just tacitly just sit on the sidelines and pretend that this is okay, because it's not. We need to shut it down at the high school level. We need to shut it down at the college level. And we even need to shut it down at the professional and Olympic level as well. And that's going to be a harder task because you're involving a whole lot of people around the world. And this trans lobby, the LGBTQ lobby, is very powerful on the secular, globalist scene, international scene. And that's going to be really hard, but we need to do it anyway. So keep praying that God brings these people wisdom, the leaders in our culture, to do the right thing here and shut this down, because this is going to mark the end of women's sports, or at least on the higher levels of women's sports. So, well, happy Christmas. We'll see you back next week on another edition of Christ and Culture. God bless.